to Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of the 23rd of September. For those who are looking in on YouTube, my name is Lewis Stark and I am the chair. I do want to cover some of the streaming policy by the Council before we start. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council website, YouTube channel, and also making a recording. This recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Yes, I jumped the gun there, sorry about the website. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, we have 3 people from the public today. Are you all happy to be photographed today? Yes, you're all happy to be photographed. Good. Please identify yourself so anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. Please could attendees keep background noise to a minimum and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. This is to ensure that recording quality is maintained and contributions can be heard clearly. So could attendees speak directly into the microphones and make sure they are switched on when they are speaking? Thank you. Right. I'm going to introduce those who are in the room first. To identify you to those who are actually looking on YouTube. But I understand, Clark, we've also got a couple online as well, have we? Yes, well, I'll check with them soon as to whether they can see and hear me. Right. On my right, we have Councillor Pepperty, who is Vice Chair of the committee, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Highfield and Councillor Davis, who are also committee members. And I'm delighted you're here today to help us in our scrutiny. On the left-hand side, we have Councillor Price, who's the Cabinet lead in this area, and welcome, Councillor Price. And I know you're going to have to leave around 12 o'clock. And so committee members, I will intend to, if we can, to get the discussion on active travel finished by then, have a short adjournment where we can have a comfort break and then agree any recommendations that we have. Also in the room, we have 2 officers to support us, which is David Land and Ben Boswell. Delighted to see you. And we have 2 officers online, and I'm going to Clark, just check with both of them that can see and hear me. We have Ed Bradford. Can you see and hear me, Ed?
I can, Councillor Stark, yeah.
Thank you. And Richard Vaughan, can you see and hear me, Richard?
I can, thank you, Councillor Stark.
And welcome to both of you. Thank you. And I hope you get a speedy recovery, Richard, from your COVID.
Thank you very much.
Right. Also to support me in conducting the Scrutiny Committee today, I have Daniel Webb, the Scrutiny Committee officer. We also have Simon Kahn, the clerk, and Joe Higgins, who's looking after the live stream. We will now actually go to the agenda. Have we got any apologies for absence, Clark? Because I don't see anyone on screen from the...
No apologies received.
No apologies. So we do have a couple missing then. No substitutes either?
No substitutes.
Okay. Have committee members any declarations of interest to make for the agenda today? Okay, fine. So we'll move on then to the minutes of our last meeting on July, which was on public rights of way. I gave a few comments, Clark, but I don't think we've had any other comments from anyone else. Are committee members happy to vote on the minutes as being a fair reflection of our meeting of July? Yes. It's okay, Councillor Davis. You could have voted against, but I would have been wondering why you might have done.
Excuse for me to clip him every year.
Thank you. That's very kind. We now come to questions from members of the public. Are you okay, Clark?
Yes.
Right.
We've received 7 questions from members of the public. 5 of those have been published as a supplement to the agenda with responses given. There are additional 2 questions that weren't processed correctly, which haven't received a response. I will read those out now, and they can then be either verbally responded to or responded in writing.
I've arranged for them to be at least responded to today, but we may need a written response on one of them.
Yeah.
So if you want to read out the first
In addition to that, the people who have asked those questions will also be entitled to submit a supplementary question as well, which we will also respond to in writing, and that will all be included within the published minutes of this meeting.
Okay, now, when they do those supplementaries, who will they address them to? Should they address them to you, Clark?
As
To
required, they can
council
submit
services?
them, and we'll process them in the correct fashion and pass them on to whoever's best
So
suited
they
to
should
answer.
address them to council services or to you?
Councillor services, if they
Yes,
submit them to councillor services.
Okay, thank you. Right, if you want to start with the first one.
The first one is from Miss Victoria Prosser. With reference to item 7 of the agenda concerning active travel measures, I should be grateful for an answer to this question. Noting that the Southern Link Road has been recast as phase 1 of the Hereford bypass, with no provision for any active travel measures in it and no justification for it being described as a standalone road, could this scrutiny meeting please recommend that the commendable enhancements and improvements to the quality off-road route known as the Great Western Way in the South Wye Transport Package within the papers for item 7 be proceeded with forthwith and not allowed to languish in procedural papers awaiting the 2025 local transport plan?
Thank you for your question, Mrs. Wegg-Prosser. I've arranged for David Land, one of the officers, to respond, at least initially, on it. David, do you want to put your microphone on, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so I think this is a bit early in the process for us to commit to saying there will be this active travel measure against this road, but I did commit to you earlier that we'll come back with a written answer because I can then speak to the officer that's much closer part of dealing with the Southern Link Road or the bypass scheme as a whole. So we'll come back with a full written answer. Is that okay?
That's fine. There is obviously an issue generally, and this is to remind everyone who's looking in, that we do have a new government, that new government has its own agenda, and that all of us are waiting to see what's coming out of the proposals from the new government, particularly in terms of not only transport, but they've also said they're going to do something on buses as well and other areas. So it is early days yet, but as long as you can give Mrs. Wegg-Prosser a written response, the committee will be very grateful, David. Okay, thank you.
Yes, the next question was from Mrs. E. Mora-Weicker, and it is, when assessing transport projects to determine best value for money, those schemes with the highest return should be delivered first, particularly when capital funding is limited. With active travel projects delivering more benefits per pound than new road schemes, these projects should be progressed ahead of road building schemes, particularly as they are often easier, quicker and simpler to deliver. The City Link Road project highlights that Herefordshire Council regularly treats active travel measures as an afterthought in transport schemes, as when the road budget was overspent, the full package of proposed non-road measures was not built, e.g. transport hub and safe segregated cycle lanes. Will the committee recommend that Herefordshire Council should follow Treasury guidelines on selecting transport projects and that active travel measures be given priority ahead road schemes that have lower benefits and returns on investment?
Thank you, Mrs. Mora-Wieska, for your question. I've arranged for Councillor Price to give a response today.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Mrs. Mora-Wieska for her supplementary question. Let's just bring this up to speed. It's no good going back over schemes that are many years delivered. The transport hub you mentioned, that is actually going to be delivered in 2025 and should be open by December 25. It's caused itself ongoing problems for several years about land, etc., with Network Rail, of which I've been very much involved with up until even this last week. You mentioned segregated cycle lanes. There's a lot of those are in the system for delivery ahead of any road building at this moment in time. There is the Ross Road cycle lanes that are in design and are now out to procurement. They will be delivered also in 2025. We have the Ayleston Hill scheme at this moment in time with a consultation with regards to Broadlands and Ayleston Hill. That's a segregated cycle and walking lanes. So these schemes are progressing. They will be delivered. They are funded. and we will go down that road. So I can't say any more than that. Whether I agree with you or not, that one scheme is more is better for value for money than another. That's a debate that we can have on just about every project we ever entertain. But just to assure you that non-road measures are being delivered quite soon in the city of Hereford. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. As we said, Mrs. Mori-Vieska, if you are listening in, you can put in a supplementary to Councillor Services and you'll get a respond in that as well. Fine. Now, I'm going to deal with the written supplementaries first, if you don't mind, and then we'll go on to the actual supplementaries from our three members of the public who are here in person. Do you want to actually read them out in order? Thanks, Clerk.
We've received a written supplementary question from Mr. Peter Mackay of Leinster, and his question is, if you will not scrutinise the identified issue of concern in isolation, my suggested topic having been accepted by the government support team and passed to your committee for scrutiny, will you scrutinise the upkeep of highway and path records in general, this not having been covered by your earlier scrutiny of public rights-of-way matters, with it reported in Hereford Times in April this year that some applications for corrections are still undecided after 27 years? If you will pursue your seeking a change to the legislation to enable a more efficient process to be used, with a local cycling and walkway infrastructure plan being raised that would require accurate information.
Thank you, Mr. Mackay, for your supplementary question. I've agreed with the clerk that we will look at your suggestion as part of our work programme agenda item later today, and it'll be up to the committee to decide whether they think this is a topic that they want to look at in the future. As for the LC whip, Mr. Land is here, but I don't think we can say anything much more about it at this stage. But have you got anything to add, Mr. Land?
There's quite a lot of information about the LC whip in the scrutiny report that we submitted, so happy to talk about that at the appropriate point. Is that okay? Unless you, or whatever you choose.
We can cover that actually in the actual agenda item 7 itself. Okay, thank you, Mr. Land.
We now have 3 supplementary questions that will be delivered by members of the public. I'll introduce the first one if you wish.
I thought we had 2 written supplementaries, didn't we?
Mr. Milne has submitted in writing, but
Mr. Milne has come here today. Okay. Right, Councillor Milne, welcome. If you want to read out your supplementary, thank you.
So your response says the Scrutiny Committee had decided it won't now consider the relationship between vehicle speed and active travel, citing the additional benefits, such as accident reduction and livability, for not doing so, when normally these would be the reasons for doing so. It is frankly astonishing this committee is not currently minded to consider the enormous cost, health and public safety benefits for active travel which accrue from addressing vehicle speeding. More than 4 years have elapsed since full council passed the motion to progress this. I therefore ask again, will this committee seek to bring this work back on track with an appropriate recommendation to support active travel by urgently investigating area-wide urban 20 mph, including around schools and accident black spots? And I add, if you're unable to provide an adequate answer now, I'm happy to receive a written one later.
No, I'm happy to respond now, Councillor Milne. The committee hasn't given up on 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. In fact, they are still very interested in looking at it, but they want to look at it in a different way. We have had discussions on it within committee, and while we haven't taken the specific link between the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit and active travel forward today, what we are minded to do is to look at speed limits generally in the context of road user safety. That's of particular concern to me as a pedestrian, Councillor Milne, because I do find speeding of real concern when I'm actually walking into Ross or walking out of Ross. So what the committee has done, it hasn't not stopped its investigation of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. what it wants to do. It wants to look at it in a different context, and that will be a candidate for our work programme next year. So I can assure you we have not lost sight of it. We are just going to look at it in terms of road safety measures next year. I hope that satisfies your concern. Right. Ms. Prothero, do you want to come and give you a supplementary, please? Have you got it on? Yes, that's it.
That's it, got it. Have the consulted views of the various stakeholders, including parents, students, and disabled people who use mobility vehicles and who may share the two-way cycle lane at some risk on Aylstone Hill, been incorporated into the design? And how does a child on a bicycle get from the shared use footpath, which appears to finish at the entrance of Broadlands Lane, to complete their journey safely to arrive at Aylstone and Broadlands schools? And how does this destination link to the homes children live in the local catchment area, the origin of their journey?
Thank you, Ms. Prothero. Councillor Price?
Yes, thank you for the supplementary question. I will take what you've just said and take it to the officer who's in charge of the design and the consultation process that is currently, or I just think, coming to an end, as to consider your view as to whether the design is adequate or needs upgrading. So we will give a written response when we've had a response back from the officer who is really right at the heart of delivering this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prothero. And Hardy, Hardy. Right. Mr. Hardy, if you want to come forward and give your supplementary, please, to the committee. Thank you.
According to the Council's website, local cycling and walking infrastructure plans were introduced 7 years ago, and most local authorities now have one in place. Even when this council finally has one in place, it is still giving itself 10 years to implement it. How soon does it plan to have a truly comprehensive cycle network in Hereford, and how much government funding does it anticipate receiving towards it?
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Councillor Price?
Yes, thank you for that question. The LC whip, it will be delivered on the schedule that we have published. How that is interpreted going forward will be no different to any other council. The funding will flow according to, and we have to have an LC whip in place to be able to get active travel funding. We still await for a number of changes from the new government coming forward as to what their policies are going to be around this. But we are in no different a place to any other authorities at this moment in time as to what we can and can't deliver. But it is all in the mix. We are looking at it, we are proactive in it, and we will deliver accordingly. Whether or not active travel is and cycling is funded to a greater or lesser degree going forward will depend on what is found in that consultation. It's in the mix at the present moment. I can't answer further than that, but you will hear in due course what we find with our LC whip. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price, and thank you, Mr. Hardy. Could you put up the 4 objectives on the screen for the next item? There's four in the report. Just bear with me, committee. I'm just getting the 4 objectives put up on the screen for all of us for the next item. Or the item after that. Right. I know, I've got to do that. Yes. Do that. Thank you. Now, we haven't got any questions from councillors, have
No,
we?
no questions received from members of the council.
Yeah, so if you could put the objectives up, I do want to talk to them in the context of the next item on active travel measures. We now move on to item 7, which is the main topic that we're going to discuss today, which is active travel measures. I wanted to put this up on the screen just to remind committee members exactly what we are looking at today, given that there's been a number of questions asked by the public about what scrutiny is actually considering today. We have 4 main objectives today. One is to consider active travel measures including road safety for all users, although we do have that road safety topic, of course, in our long list for the work programme, but we can actually link that today if we want to. Explore the county policy on implementing active travel measures where a new road build is being proposed. Explore where the council is on implementation of active travel measures across the county, and explore the benefits and challenges of active travel measures around key buildings such as schools, hospitals and residential roads in Herefordshire. So if we just consider active travel measures generally, Councillor Highfield, do you want to lead on the debate? Because I think you had a particular question you wanted to raise in general about active travel measures.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just start by painting a little bit of background? One of the country that is the most advanced in integrating active travel with other transport measures is Denmark. And they had a policy right after World War II where they hoped in every city in Denmark it would be 1/3 walking, cycling, 1/3 public transport and 1/3 private cars. And they pretty much achieved that. But that's taken them since World War II. They've had this policy in place for a very long time. So all their road building plans, all their developments took this into account. They've got cycleways that are like flyovers. They're not alongside main roads. They're completely separate and they go over. So this is a massive undertaking and extremely expensive and probably not even something we can think about. So when we talk about active travel, the other point I'd like to make is that active travel should not be an alternative to our means of moving around. It's got to be complementary. We somehow have to fit the active travel into our general need to move from A to B. So I think it's clear this council and pretty much all the populace supports active travel, but how you go about it and how you go about it affordably is very difficult. Having said that, the other issue, of course, I might add is that last time I was in Copenhagen, I got caught in a terrible traffic jam because there was heavy rain and nobody wanted to go on their bicycles or walk, and the buses were all full. And so everybody turned to their cars. So there is a problem with active travel as an alternative to other means of getting from A to B. People are pretty reluctant on a cold, wet January morning to get on their bicycle to go to work. And that creates its own issues. So having said all that, we have the opportunity, I've mentioned this to Councillor Price before, we have a new bypass, which we really hope will go ahead. We don't know how the new government is going to treat this yet. But I would have thought that incorporating active travel into the plan would be a means of helping this new government, given what it's been saying, to be supportive. I noticed they're cancelling bypass projects around the country. They haven't cancelled ours yet. Maybe it hasn't reached the stage where they feel they need to cancel it. And in so doing, we can justify the costs, because I'd like to see, which is a sort of a parallel subject, I'd like to see us incorporate solar farm into the bypass so that we can, of course, help the power generation for this county, but also it will be greener and it will be an attractive alternative to putting solar farms on good farmland, which I particularly don't like. So what I want to see is that the policies are designed to integrate the active travel measures into an overall transport plan, which I believe is the plan anyway, but how that's to be done is very difficult. And can we incorporate the active travel into the bypass plans along with solar farm as part of the project, partly because it's practically useful and partly because it would make it more attractive, I hope, to this incoming government. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything at this point, Councillor Price?
No, I'm going to listen to the debate and we'll add up a few
Okay.
points later. Thank you.
Yes. We have a report from officers and a number of appendices, and I'm grateful for it. But I think one of the concerns I've got as chair is a lot of this is distant in terms of the analyses we've got before us. And while we do talk about active travel measures in the council quite generally, it is often part of another plan. There isn't really, from what I can see, any one place where you could have the sort of vision that you've just talked about there in terms of what we want to do as a county in terms of using our active travel measures to achieve. And I think that's quite an important starting point, and that's something I didn't see from the papers particularly clearly. If you look at paragraph 5 in the report, the DFT's 4 objectives for active travel are to increase the percentage of short journeys in towns and cities that are walked or cycled, increase people's annual walking activity, double rates of cycling, and increase the percentage of children aged 5 to 10 who usually walk to school. Now, I'm not seeing these objectives discussed anywhere within the council. I'm not saying they're necessarily the ones that we would think might be the priority within Herefordshire. But that's the point. We have this idea about active travel, but I don't think it's synthesised anywhere in council plans in a way that makes it clear what we think active travel means for the council and what the aims and objectives are from it, which is back to your point about Denmark, I think, and their vision. Councillor Hyde.
Yeah, and it needs clarification as to whether the purpose of active travel is for health reasons, which some of these objectives publicised seem to be, or for an alternative way of getting people from A to B. And the problem with the latter is that it works great until you get a rotten January morning, and then it does not work as an alternative way of getting from A to B, because nobody wants to walk or get on a bicycle when it's cold and wet. That is the sad but unfortunate reality of it. There's a few exceptions. Councillor Pebbody would obviously, who's come here on a motorbike through the rain this morning, would undoubtedly be one of the few that would persevere anyway. But most people don't do that, I'm afraid. So there's the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Hyde. Councillor Pebbody.
Just don't want to lose sight of the fact that there is another very good reason for active travel, and that is to reduce congestion, which is why we talk about road building. Active travel is to reduce congestion. It's health benefits, it's getting to A to B, it's all those, but it's also a way of reducing congestion, which makes things better for those who have to use their car. There's always a recognition that there are some people who choose to use their car, prefer to use their car, and those are supported through active travel.
Yeah, I support that. except for the point about a cold January morning, when it will not help people in their cars.
Councillor Thomas?
Just from my own point of view in my own ward, I think we're slightly muddy in the waters here because 20-mile-an-hour speed limits should not be linked with active travel. I've got a village that we can have no active travel because of the way the road goes through the village, but they're desperate for a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. And we need to we just separate them, but what we need to do is, in the case of this village, which is much future, for the parish council to apply for a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. They have a school in the middle of the village. It's a very dangerous bit of road. It's absolutely classic, should be 20 mile an hour. But they are finding it very difficult to pick their way through the minefield because of it being linked with active travel. So we really need to, we can have active travel, but we need to have the speed limit as a separate thing altogether, because that is for safety and no other reason. There is nowhere we can put a footpath through the village. There is one, just a small one that the school built, but so we need to sort of have a separate thing here. So I'm sort of going off piste a little bit here, but we don't appear to have it.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. In fact, that was part of the debate that the committee had about how it deals with speed limits going forward in terms of our work programme. And what you've just said there is that's why we want to look at speed limits in the context of road safety generally, because that's where our concerns are. Because you're quite right, there are occasions where if traffic slowed down, people might feel more confident about walking and cycling. The problem with speed is much more wider than that and has a context in terms of road safety generally. And that's why we have not decided today to look at 20 miles per hour specifically in the context of active travel, but to look at it in terms of road safety. But I'm concerned, Councillor Price, we are talking here about what is active travel meant to achieve. And we should really be having that debate at this stage. It should be around the other way. We should really have a clear vision in this council of what the aims and objectives we are trying to achieve through active travel. Councillor Price, is there anything that you have that you're going to be bringing forward to put to council about what we as a council want to achieve in terms of aims and objectives for active travel as a separate document?
I mean, you all know that it is a very large subject and a lot of debate about it. So let me just address one or two of the things that have already been said. In the original plans for the bypass, which were built in about 2016-17, there was active travel measures alongside the bypass, but not part of the bypass. For the love of the money, I do not understand why we would entertain building a road with active travel measures right alongside it. A, the health issues and the safety issues. Why would you have active travel measures on the side of cars travelling at whatever speed they travel at? The congestion, the issues of pollution from a road and mixing it with walking and cycling isn't something we should plan. We should build active travel measures completely separately. So it sort of addresses what Councillor Highfield was saying about having active travel measures for active travel measures per se. So, and I accept that, and I think that's quite good. So in regard to the second point that he made, which was solar panels on bypass, that's great if it's a dual carriageway. The bypass as planned was never a dual carriageway, whereas my view it ought to have been. And I think Councillor Highfield's issue on solar was probably down the central area of a dual carriageway. But these things will always have a conversation in any of the design. I've got to mention there of item 5, which is walking to school. So this walking to school business, you know, all schools have a travel plan for how they get their children in. and it becomes a challenge. And one of those challenges is back to the point that he raises about, the cold and wet January morning. You can have a walking bus service for all children in an urban area. You could have 50, 100, even 10 children walking to school. But on that one morning when the weather says that's not great, will it happen? And what's the backup plan when you have bad weather? So whether or not it reduces congestion, that's all down to the design of what you've got. I mean, you can reduce congestion by forcing issues, or you can design congestion out of the argument by having plans for where cars go, where your buses go, where your active travel measures are. These are all points that, they become into the consultation, they come into the design, and then eventually they come into the full business plans for these projects. There's an issue here about, and I know you don't want to talk about 20-mile-an-hour zones, but should active travel be linked to 20-mile-an-hour zones? I have a completely different approach to 20-mile-an-hour zones. We've put a standing a holding position for 20-mile-an-hour zones is to be outside any school in this county. So, on the point that Councillor Thomas raises, there's a school in Much Dew Church. They could have a 20-mile-an-hour zone there if they applied for it. And I know the road. It is a dangerous road. I wouldn't want to have that to become an active travel area. But I know the school in question did want to have, some years ago, a completely different arrangement for kids arriving to school, right across the fields with a coach pull in, and they walked around the back of the village into the school. I don't know how far that's progressed, but these things we get driven by the responses we get from the people there. The response I would like you to consider is whether or not AI, artificial intelligence, can introduce something here about congestion and speed limits. If you were to use artificial intelligence to automatically slow vehicles rather than having speed limits, so you set where you want to have your 20-mile-an-hour zone, your 30, your 40, your 50s, your 70s, or whatever speed it is not a million miles away from being able to deliver artificial intelligence that says that car approaching here will go at that speed. That would take away this ridiculous scenario of, and I'm hearing it on a daily basis, that you spend more time looking at the dials on your car as to what speed you're going, rather than taking care of the aspect of safety, that you're a safe driver. Every single driver in this country passes a test, and that takes the responsibility to that driver to drive carefully in and around their daily activities. That said, not a lot of people follow the 20-mile-an-hour because it is too slow for modern day cars, and as such, if you want to control it and make sure that you can enforce it, you have to do it through a different method than the driver of the vehicle. That's my own personal view, and I think that's where it will go. Whether it will happen in 1 year, 5 years, or 20 years, I don't know. So in all of these things, you start to go into other areas. And that's the whole point of these sort of scrutiny meetings, is which areas are to be part and parcel of the decision making for the particular item you're talking about. So while you're talking about particular things about active travel, it starts down into every other aspect of what we do in this council, whether it's health, whether it's congestion, whether it's road building or cycle lane building, etc. And we are actively involved in all of that at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. But we are producing plans, the local transport plan and the LC whip. And what I'm trying to get at today, would it be valuable to have another plan, or at least some document that set out what we wanted to achieve from active travel measures, rather than just having them as a complement to the plans that we produce at the moment, so that we had a clear focus on what we wanted to achieve from active travel. Ben, do you want to come in at this stage? Thank you.
Yeah, if I can do. I think other colleagues might be able to support, but I think in terms of the strategy, because you're looking at the high-level strategy, aren't you? And almost where we are. So I suppose the corporate there's the corporate plan, which sets out obviously growth and safety, and it includes environmental. So it's all of the things you need to consider within each of those, and active travel delivers on a lot of those. Then underneath that, we've got the core strategy objectives, which is very much looking at, again, reducing carbon through transport, looking at enabling clean growth, safety, as I said, and it's kind of then filtering that through. So there are those strategy objectives in those documents already in terms of the corporate plan, then the core strategy, the local transport plan, which is obviously being worked on, and then I suppose whether or not it's the one you're referring to is the LC WIP that sits underneath that, because then that's the more detailed one around walking and cycling infrastructure, and actually that more strategic view of the cycle network. And I think earlier on we were talking about schemes, but I think that looks at it holistically, looking at trip origins, looking at destinations, looking at needs, propensity to cycle, etc. And I think that's maybe where a lot of the delivery is. But I think, are you looking more at potentially a recommendation then that says, articulation of that active travel element of those wider documents? But I think really that would be sitting within the local transport plan as that's updated. I don't know if Dave wanted to jump in.
Yes. I'll call you David in future because I should have called you Dr. Lang. Sorry, David, I'll just use your first name.
That's
David.
fine. I only really to support what Ben says, that actually it depends on what you recommend, but I think the local transport plan should be able to articulate that where active travel is, what we want to achieve from active travel as a council, and then the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan should be able to say this is where this is what we're going to do to support that structure. So I would hope we could probably make sure the LTP articulates clearly what you're after here, rather than a separate document. But that's not, if that's your recommendation, that's fine. I just think probably we ought to be the LTP should do that.
Sorry. But active travel is more than just transport. I mean, active travel is about public health. It's about air pollution. It's about making people conscious of their actual lifestyle. There's behavioural change there. If we just restrict it to the local transport plan or to an LC WIP, which is about means by which you might do that, I just think we lose the richness of what we could achieve in terms of active travel. Certainly in looking at all the documents you've provided and looking at other sort of sources, the public health aspect of active travel is huge. It's really quite a big area. And this is one of the concerns I've got. By shoehorning it into simply a transport plan or an LC WIP, you lose that sort of ability to actually push it as part of our public health agenda as well. Councillor Peverty, you want to say something?
I recognise in all those documents that active travel is accepted by the council as being something that's incredibly positive, that should be done, has all the benefits, that kind of feeds into all the other policies that we want to do. But I don't recognise that commitment from Councillor Price when you talk about why should we include active travel, with the bypass. I understand your reasons for it, but the thing is, what's behind that is a bit of an afterthought, which I think Councillor Highfield was referring to as well, that you build your road and then as an afterthought there's a bit of active travel that's kind of tagged on somewhere else. And this is one of the public questions that came up, is it's part of the thinking. It has to be a kind of integral part of our thinking, and it has to be top priority. So why are we looking at new road building when we all accept and we all understand that active travel has so many more benefits? So it's not so much about perhaps not having the right kind of words in a document to support it, but it's a kind of mindset as well. I don't know if you agree, Louis.
Well, I'll say one thing before we move on. Active travel by itself is a very important part of the policy agenda that we should have in this council. And I get concerned when it gets linked to road building and when it gets linked to specific aspects of transport, because I believe it's more than that. That's what I'm trying to try and articulate today. And this is why I'm trying to make this debate much more than simply something that's specific to a particular part of the planning structure that we've got at the moment, for example. I think it's more than that. But I'm going to bring in Councillor Highfield now and then Councillor Davis, because I do want to get at this idea. Is there a recommendation here they want to make as a committee about a statement that needs to be made at the highest level on active travel in the council?
I think we all agree there are a lot of benefits with active travel, but there is a tendency to ignore some of the practical problems when people pursue the dream. For example, I'm quite keen on cycling, but I don't cycle near my house because to cycle on the roads where I live, to say go 3 miles to Kington, it just doesn't feel safe. And to make it safe, to make it practical for cyclists, you need to retrain all the road drivers, and that's not feasible. It's feasible to do a lot for Hereford City, and because it doesn't have a bypass apart from anything else, it has got a lot of traffic congestion within the city, and it needs an alternative. But there, and of course the point being made that if we have a policy, if we have a more all-embracing policy, it has to be different between a city like Hereford and a village like Lions-Hall, where the problems are completely different, and the achievement of active travel is extraordinarily difficult. It's more or less flat in the city of Hereford, apart from Elston Hill, and the rest of it is flattish. But it's not like that in many of our rural areas. So, and the other reason why it's not an afterthought, but when you talk about, for example, a cycleway, when there's a new road like a bypass, it gives you an opportunity with the land. You're going to have to be getting the land to put the bypass in. That gives you the opportunity to get, unfortunately, not enough for the dual carriageway that I agree with Councillor Price would have been better, but at least it gives you the opportunity to give you that extra bit. And when we say that, and here I disagree with Councillor Price, the pollution problem of having a cycleway alongside a highway is far less than the pollution problem of currently cycling in Hereford City, where all the trucks are stop-start and lined up, where the air pollution for pedestrians and cyclists cannot be good alongside the A49. Whereas when they're travelling at an economical speed on a bypass, and you can mitigate the pollution issues, I think they're going to get less. Vehicles are getting cleaner. We're in Euro 5 plus now. Vehicles' emissions are getting cleaner and cleaner from the point of view of nitrates and NOx. So I think that the reason it appears as an afterthought is because when you have a new road project, it gives you an opportunity to create the space for active travel, which often doesn't come up. And to be able to have a semicircular cycle and walking route with spokes that lead into the key parts of the city would be very attractive for people to adopt active travel. And I think you could mitigate any air pollution issues that come with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Highfield. Before I bring in Councillor Davis, I don't think what you've said about whether a policy can apply equally to all parts of the county stops you from having a policy. Because we've got an economic growth policy, and we know that doesn't apply equally across the county. I mean, you've got Rotherwas, hopefully we're going to have model farm in Ross. In some of the areas, in the rural areas, they'll tailor it to whatever is required. But I do feel that not having some sort of policy in active travel stops you from actually having these sorts of debates continually within council, stops you having officers focusing on, well, what is the active travel issue here when it comes to a particular decision that's been taken. So my view is, and obviously I will take on board what the committee think, is that a recommendation from us that does talk about having some sort of active travel policy, which does set out the aims and objectives of what we want to achieve from it, would help in terms of actually focusing council decisions on what they should achieve from an active travel perspective. That's a thought. And when it comes to your village, you wouldn't necessarily apply that equally as you would apply it to Hereford, but it would still at least make this debate richer in terms of saying, well, what do we want to do as regards that particular rural location when it comes to our active travel policy for the county? At least it gets the question asked. So that's the thought I've got in terms of the recommendation that I'm thinking about. Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Chair. My thoughts on active travel, I think we should look at it to enriching all our lives in the way we move around the county, be that within the city, the county towns or villages. And consequently, the active travel covers all aspects from pedestrians, cyclists, people using public transport, be that our bus service, our train hubs, and also motorists who do drive into the city or into other areas for work and then have to walk from car parks to whatever destination they're going to. So active travel does cover all aspects of that, which I think is quite key. Part of the my concerns is our ability to enhance traffic, as already Councillor Peabody has said, about being able to use active travel to enhance traffic. You know, reducing traffic by having more pedestrians, cyclists, and public bus service, and to try and reduce some of the car journeys that people are doing. So consequently, an improvement in the area of maybe the city doesn't have at the moment dedicated bus lanes. And that might be an option for the future, is to look at, could we incorporate bus lanes that will have with them cycle paths, so the bus lanes can, as in many cities, will have cyclists, motorcyclists, buses and taxis using them. That would reduce traffic congestion within the city potentially. Maybe not in all areas, because that's restricted by the size and shape of our roads. And that's maybe something we should look at to the future, is to see where we can adapt and change things. And, you know, if that means converting pavements into dual usage for pedestrians and cyclists, and converting maybe where we have multiple lanes of traffic into 2 lanes of traffic with then dedicated lanes for bus service. That might enhance our ability to get around. I'll put that back to you.
Keep that thought, Councillor Davis, because if you think there's a recommendation coming out of what you just said there, because I know we had this debate at the pre-planning meeting, and you are a keen cyclist, and you're concerned that even the indications of where you can cycle are not very clear, and therefore that's a safety issue in itself, because the one thing you don't want with road users is uncertainty. I mean, the Highway Code has brought in a new hierarchy of road use, which means that pedestrians have the right of way when cars are turning left, as I understand it. But you find a driver that will stop when you want to cross as pedestrian when they're turning left. They're more likely to hoot at you and get quite annoyed. So there is an issue there around about certainty, and I think that's quite a key one. There are behavioural issues, but I don't know whether we'll be able to do much about that, because that's a much wider issue. But that idea of maybe bringing more certainty into what road users can expect in terms of using the roadway, I think that might be quite a useful recommendation that we could bring in. Councillor Highfield.
Just a quick aside. I personally like the idea of dual use pedestrian and cycle paths. However, I'll give you a true story. I've been in 3 different cities where this is actually the case. The first one was Japan, and lots of mothers in particular take their children to school on electric pedal assist bicycles with a kid on the back in a seat and a kid in the front in the seat, and off they go to school, and they go on the footpaths. And if they come up behind a pedestrian, they will slow down, even get off and walk until the pedestrian notices them, and then will move out of the way for them. In New York, they have a likewise system, and when the cyclist comes up behind somebody walking, you'll hear them call out, "Coming through," and the pedestrians will move out of the way. When it happens in Sydney, the cyclist says, "Get out of the way!" And these are the issues you've got when you've got a mix of pedestrians. It takes a long time to educate people. In Japan, they're extremely well educated about this whole issue of mixing cyclists and pedestrians. It's very difficult to do in practice quickly. It would take a long time, and I don't know how you would train the public to adjust to it. But it's a very, very useful system if it can be made to work.
Yes, and I've been told to get out of the way on Whitecross Street because the cyclist was coming up too fast. But there is still this idea of certainty that Councillor Davis has brought into that. If people were aware of what to expect when they were using, as you say, these dual purpose paths, then that would at least be part of the solution. But Councillor Davis, if you can think of a recommendation that you can pick through in that one, then I'm more than happy if you do so. Pardon?
Questions from Ben, Dave.
Yeah. Right, fine.
Just as a technical note, Chair, I don't know if you've come across a document called LTM 120, which is Local Transport 120, which government put out a few years ago, which is about segregating. And actually, their preference from the DFT is that you segregate cycling from pedestrians for precisely those reasons that have been called. Now, of course, you haven't always got the space to do that, which is why it's a kind of should rather than a must. But that is the technical advice from the DFT, is that you should, wherever possible, segregate.
And that's going to guide the LC whip, is it?
Yeah, I think it's sorry, I don't want to jump in on the conversation, but I guess it's I suppose we're kind of going from strategy a little bit to, I suppose, operation in a little bit, aren't we? And I guess I'm not sure which bit to pick up, but I suppose going back to the strategy, I think one thing I just wanted to sort of reiterate and give you some reassurance really is that the council very much does look at active travel very joined up. So, I mean, just from, I suppose, officers today, I suppose, myself in the climate, environmental, same as Richard, and the active travel, working very closely with Dave on the wider transport strategy and Ed on I suppose, the delivery. But we also do a lot of projects very closely with public health and road safety as well, really, because I think it goes back to my earlier sort of point towards the corporate plan, because the corporate plan sets those strategic hooks for growth, for sustainable growth, for safe mobility, for road safety, for reducing carbon and public health. And I think it's all of those together. And I think your previous conversation was around potentially a recommendation to articulate active travel in that way a little more clearly. And I think, as Dave suggested, that would naturally come forward in the local transport plan. But I guess if the recommendation is for that to be broader and not transport, I guess that, I think, was where you were going. But I just wanted to reassure you, we've done a lot of work there, and some examples of that were where we worked with public health through, I suppose, referrals, public health referrals into active travel. So essentially people were unwell with health issues, and we were referring them to walking and cycling support and training. And just one very small example, but that does happen across the council already. And I think your conversation was maybe just having a policy recommendation about how you articulate that. But I just wanted to reassure you that the council does do that already. And I think, as Dave was articulating with the LTN 120, when you're looking at scheme development and mapping, I suppose it's just good to be aware that, you know, that is what the LC Whip is looking at. It's looking at the whole area base, looking at desire lines, looking at destinations, and it's not always obvious where cyclists may want to go, because a lot of people would cycle for convenience, for health, for carbon, for cost, and those drivers are very different as to why somebody would cycle. So a very competent cyclist might just prefer to go on the road because it might be more direct and they could go faster, because cycle networks, cycle lanes are not typically designed to be above 15 mile an hour, and a very capable cyclist will probably be going at, say, 20, so it might be more appropriate on the road. And I think it's all of those things to consider in that development, which is what the LC Whip is looking to do. So, sorry, I've touched on a few things there, but I just wanted to help.
But Ben, we've had these conversations before when we've been looking at other topics where you've told us what's going on, but it's not always been clear to us as a committee that that is what's happening. And that's why we've come up with recommendations before. And I still think this recommendation on a high-level policy statement on active travel is a good one, because if it's just forming strands of various plans, then the other recommendation we were thinking about, which is it should join up with other plans. Forgive us, but we don't necessarily see a joined up approach there, because we only see one plan saying one thing about active travel here, another plan might say something about active travel in the context of that particular plan, given its remit. For example, in transport it might say something, public health might say something. We keep going to sessions where public health are trying to get themselves integrated more into what goes on in the council, because there's a public health agenda there, and it doesn't always transfer across to what we're doing elsewhere. So you're quite right, Ben. We've got to be careful that we don't move on to the operational side too quickly. And we will be talking about that later in the debate. But I can see a couple of recommendations here, committee, and it's up to you if you want to approve them. One is on, because of our need for a greater focus and scrutiny of what our aims and objectives are, is a high-level policy statement of what we want to achieve out of active travel. And the second one is to ensure a joined-up approach, because that is the key thing. If we have these aims and objectives that cut across a number of aspects of council policy and operations, then you want that to be joined up as well. And I think there's nothing wrong with those two recommendations, as I can see at the moment. Councillor Previty, then Councillor Highfield.
I think Ben's point about people having different reasons for wanting to cycle, and that, you know, someone might choose to cycle on the road, just emphasises the point that we shouldn't ever be considering new road build without active travel measures alongside it. And it seems to me that some county policy is about, well, we build a road and then we kind of subsequently create extra active travel infrastructure somewhere else. But isn't there a reason for, when you're considering any new road build, there has to be active travel measures alongside it?
But see, that would be achieved by this high-level policy, because if you got that as a policy, that's a commitment from the council, then every time they take a decision that has a relevance when it comes to active travel, they would have to consider the active travel dimension. That's the point I'm trying to make. Whereas we're looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope. We tend to look at it from a piece of infrastructure we might want to build or whatever, and then what's the active travel element of that? It tends to get added on, which I think is the wrong way around. But if we have these recommendations, Ben, then clearly you can consider them and decide how you want to take them forward. Councillor Highfield, then Councillor Price, okay?
Yeah, I mean, it's listed here in the papers. The local transport plan has objective 2 in the which are the objectives for it, which lists the things that we've just been talking about as an objective to achieve. It has, I think, 5 or 6 areas which cover all the points that we just made. I mean, you're talking about needing a new sort of higher level policy. How presumably to encapsulate all those? How can we do that differently to what something that's already officially part of the local transport plan? And another point I'd make is, whatever the plans have been over the years, a fairly recent large development, Hereford Point, which is not that far from the city, does not have a cycle connection to the cycle network that does exist. I don't know how that got built without any, without any cycle paths, because it's not that far away to get to the cycle path that goes along. It's about half a mile from a cycle track network that leads it closer to the city centre, but it's not connected. There are no cycle paths. How do we build a big development like that without that? I don't know.
But we've also got aspects of active travel, which is in our public health plan and agenda as well. But that's the local transport plan.
They're all included in the local transport
Yeah, but
plan.
we could take it out and have it as a standalone, and then everything else could hang from it. It's around the wrong way. That's what I'm thinking, Councillor Highfield. But we can debate that when we come to our recommendations. Councillor Price, you've been very patient.
No, I'm just enjoying listening to the conversation. There's a few points, and you've actually addressed the points, but you're not joining them up. So the practicality and approach of what we've got. So Herefordshire is a very large rural county, and you've mentioned several times about the rural roads, rural villages being different from Hereford. When it comes to this discussion, we nearly always base it on Hereford City because of dealing with that issue. And I take exactly what Councillor Pepperdy just said. The approach to designing the bypass originally definitely was considering how active travel measures were to be constructed alongside of it, to make sure that people could actually move across that road or along that road or around the city, because it was going to be built into the design, and that's still the case. However, if you look at the reverse, trying to deliver active travel in the city of Hereford as what you've got actually demands that you look at, can we emphasize it more? And if we did more of it, what would be the impact? And the impact would be that you would have to have infrastructure, i.e. bypass around, to get traffic out of the city that does not need to be there, that is impacting the delivery of active travel. So we've got to a point at this present moment with the current funding that we're at, and nobody's made a mention of it yet, but the south of Hereford and across the river and into the city centre has got an enormous amount of cycling and quiet routes being delivered in the next 12 months. An enormous amount, and I'm surprised it hasn't been mentioned there so far on here. It's a phenomenal amount coming. No mention of any roads at this moment in time in it. But the point being, bus routes are suggested there's no way you could introduce bus routes into Hereford without getting rid of every piece of traffic that has no right to be there. You just can't do it. There isn't the tarmac to be able to make bus routes. It might be an ambition, and if it is, you will have to have a bypass. There's no doubt about that. But one of the issues that's cropped up over the last 12 months is with active travel, there has been a push to have, as well as the Aylstone Hill cycle and walkway, is to continue that on into the city centre. But that is conflicting with the issue of how do we deal with the rurality of the county and people who drive their cars and where they park when they come to the city. If you want the city to prosper and be an economic hub, whether it's socially, culturally, retail or anything else, you have to deal with those people that the only form of transport is the car. And we are now getting to a conflicting place whereby there is a car parking strategy that's been in the mix at the present moment, is how do we deal with the cars that have to be here as against those that do not have to be there? And that is now conflicting with the delivery of potential cycle routes into the city centre, particularly in Commercial Road. Now, these things, it's the practicality of delivering something. We understand exactly all of the comments you're saying and how we want to do it. So be careful with your recommendations, because if you're going to make a recommendation, consider what that will impact on elsewhere. Hereford's been here for a very long time. It's growing into a place that is becoming problematic for all sorts of reasons, and whatever you do here will have an impact over there.
We won't be telling you how to design schemes today, Councillor Price, but you've touched upon what is a really sore point for me, which is the Hereford focus of a lot of the infrastructure funding on active travel, because I come from Ross and we rely on a bus service, and being a pedestrian at Ross is not easy. Leaving aside the hills, it's quite dangerous at times because we lack proper road crossings, we lack consideration from drivers as to what they might do when they drive too fast through wet weather. I've been soaked several times. So when you're talking about Hereford, we need to talk about the wider county, because this is why I want to move it out of transport, Councillor Highfield, because I want to know how I, as a pedestrian, can actively travel better to Hereford if I have to. I'm sure others would like to know that as well. And it's not just about transport. I want to do that from a public health aspect as well. I want to be able to enjoy a walk to the bus stop, get a bus and get to Hereford and walk across Hereford to where I might want to go safely, rather as I have to do today when I'm walking up to Plough Lane, having to dive through traffic from time to time at my own risk. So I'm maybe not articulating it very well at the moment, but this is the issue I've got, is that it's not just about transport. It's about a way of life. It's about allowing someone like me, who has a starting point in Ross, to walk and bus to another point across the county, and to enable that to happen. And I'm not sure that
I'm
I
100%
can see that.
with that. I'm not opposed.
And
I
that's
think
what I'm getting at.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why I don't see our recommendations that I might suggest has to be much wider than just transport. It has to be something that focuses the council on saying, right, what is, if that is the aspiration of someone, what, if anything, can we do to actually make that better? And that means a joined-up approach. That means a joined-up approach on the way we design pedestrian access through our towns. Pedestrianisation might come into it. Buses come into it. We don't have a train station. We'll never have a train station. That went in 1965 under Beeching. It's cloud cuckoo land to think you could ever have a train line from Ross again. People have talked about it, but it just won't happen because so much of the land has been changed into different use. So taking that idea, this is why I really don't think burying something in a local transport plan is really going to address that. And I don't think that joined up approach across the council is going to be achieved unless we make that active travel aspiration something bigger and wider than those particular parts of the planning structure.
So what your suggestion is, basically the wording is okay, but it should be taken out of the local transport plan and made into its own separate policy that follows basically the same objectives, but promotes it sort of because it makes it its own thing. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is about behavioural change as well, and transport's a provider to help you change your behaviour, but it's not. You might need education campaign, a public health campaign along these lines, and everything else. It's more than just simply transport. It's more than just simply worrying about what you do with a new road. I mean, what Councillor Davies has talked about is right. It is about an enabler by having routes that are definable and clear to people who are pedestrians or who are cyclists, and what the hierarchy of that is.
Because some of it is so important to transport. For example, if I want to take public transport to go to the hospital, the new transport hub, great. I'm going to get a bus, and my bus already goes there, so my bus would go to the new transport hub. But then I've got to walk through very awkward pedestrian crossings, some of them without even a green man signal, to do that, what, quarter of a mile to the hospital? It's not joined up. So maybe if we had something, yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. And the second recommendation would be that joined-up approach as well. Well, let's look at it afterwards when we consider it, because I want to move the debate on now. Ben, one last thing on this aspect.
I was just going to say, I think, going back to what I said earlier, I think active travel is already a golden thread through a lot of the council's policies and strategies. It might be helpful for us to take a recommendation or an action to come back to you to I suppose, show that in an organogram that shows how that flows through. And that's not to say don't make recommendations you want to, but I think just to help that, we can show you, where because active travel is in the big economic plan, it's in the carbon reduction plan, it's in the council's own carbon management plan, it's in the corporate plan, it's in the local plan. So it's in all of those things. I think what you're describing is how better to articulate that, but I just want to show you it is there, and maybe for us to show that better for you in terms of that. And I think your other point where you were talking, Councillor Stark, around your example of coming from Ross to Herefordshire and the multimodal transport there. So I suppose there's different. That I guess that aspect would sit almost entirely within the transport plan as delivering that as a transportation function, because you're looking to go from A to B, and within that you're looking at the walking element, the cycling element, potentially cycling element, potentially park and choose, because you might choose to get in the car, you might walk a little way, get in the car, drive a bit, use one of the park and choose locations at the end of the city, to then come in sort of either on barrel, walk, cycle, etc. And I think those things are captured within, I suppose, the Choose How You Move behaviour change campaign we do to do that with. And I think some of the examples of that are in the papers. There's the bus improvement strategy, was looking at improving the bus options across the county. Then the LC WIP, which is a county-wide document. It's not just looking at Hereford, but it's looking at that. And then it's creating those choices so that people can then look at joining them up and making that a multimodal journey, if that makes sense.
That could be a response to our recommendations, Ben. But I still think it's worthwhile at least having a debate in Cabinet on what we've just said, because I still don't clearly see a joined-up approach yet across the whole council on this. And as a pedestrian, I'm very keen that it shouldn't just be about cyclists, because we poor pedestrians get left, we get forgotten about. And there's fewer and fewer people walking our roads these days. Do you realise that? I mean, I'm one of the non-dog owners that walks, if I can make that point. Because if it wasn't for dogs, a lot of old people wouldn't walk. And that's the point. But I want to move away from strategy now, because I know we've really discussed that at length. And I know Councillor Price wants to leave at 12, and I want to finish the debate. I want to go on to the operational side now. One thing that's clear from the public questions is there's a lot of interest in the various active travel schemes that are going on. I think we would say that. And I'm not aware of all the active travel schemes that are going on in the country. Councillor Price has already alluded to the amount of new schemes that might be coming on board in south of Hereford. And I just wondered, I want to test this with you, is there anywhere in the council where you have a list of all the schemes that are going on at the moment in terms of active travel?
Sorry, I didn't turn my mic on. Do you want me to
Well,
answer?
I'll let Councillor Highfield add it, and then you can come back, Ben.
Yeah, ideally, a map that shows the whole cycle network and those that are not yet finished but are underway, they're funded or they're under construction, could be in a different colour. So everybody would see at a glance. A map is probably the best way to, rather than a typed list.
Ben?
So I think what you're describing there is the LC whip, really, in terms of all the schemes. So what we've got, if I take Herefordshire, for example, we've already, the city, you've got the Hereford City cycling map. So on the website, we've got that mapped, and that shows dedicated off-road routes. It shows the suggested routes, the quiet routes, the 20 mile an hours, and that shows you the network for the city. We've got the same for a number of market towns with those, and they're updated and published on the website. So that's what's there. I think in terms of what does what does it all joined up look like together with all what we want to do in the future? That's the LC whip. The LC whip is looking at all of those future schemes, bringing them together into one place. So that's still in development, but that's what you're describing, I think. Around that, then you've also got the sort of behaviour change programs, which is what Richard Vaughan's team do. So within that, we've got a dedicated officer that works with schools and businesses on travel planning to try and help them to develop their own travel plans, to help that behaviour change aspect of it. We're working closely with Bikeability, and we got funded to go into schools to do that Bikeability level 2, level 3 training to get more children to walk and cycle to school and to do that safely. We've then got the road safety schemes in terms of how we're looking to do that and align that as well. So I think the local transport plan will bring all of that together as the overarching plan, and then within that you've got the bus improvement strategy, you've got the LC whip there, you've got the road safety elements, and then you've got the destination Hereford, which is that behaviour change stuff, and then again it's all those public health links as well. So I think the overarching plan that will bring it all together is the local transport plan, but for walking and cycling in terms of schemes, that will be the LC whip.
Sorry to viewers. I'll tell you why I'm asking for it, is I'm very concerned that that will show a great deal of activity in Hereford, but not much else going on across the county, and this is what worries me. The levelling up bid, Councillor Price, didn't help either, the fact that it was successful for Hereford. Because living in a market town, I don't know about Leominster, I don't know about Kington or Bromyard or Ledbury, but there's not a lot of active travel measures going forward in Ross, unless it's funded by the Ross Town Council or by S106 to try and get a few extra level crossings. We do have a movement study, Ben. As you know, a lot of market towns do have a movement study. I've been banging at the door for that movement study to be incorporated into plans. So one of the issues I've got, and it's something we need to think about as a recommendation again, is there not a need to rebalance the funding that's going on in active travel away from Hereford to actually help some at least the market towns, if not some of the rural areas, in terms of funding active travel infrastructure and projects that would help them to actually take the benefit of active travel, which they cannot necessarily do at the moment because I don't think we are actually focusing on it. I don't think there's a focus on active travel across the county of equal measure, Ben. That's what I'm saying. It's tending to be really focused on Hereford. Does anyone else in the committee want to? Yes, Councillor Highfield.
Just 2 words. All of our market towns have a bypass. Hereford doesn't have one.
But that doesn't help active travel necessarily. From
Yes, it does. It takes the traffic out of the town centre and means that cycling through or walking through the town centre is a lot easier and less polluted. It's too far from me, Ross.
Cycle routes, crossings, better signage, encouragement. I don't think there's enough being done across the county. I think too much of it has been focused on Hereford. But Ben, I'll bring you in now.
I mean, that might be a recommendation if the recommendation is to look more at market towns and Herefordshire. I think that's potentially your recommendation, isn't it? I think the LT whip is looking county-wide. It's not looking at one over the other. It's looking across the whole county. So, again, if that's a desire of the committee to make that recommendation, that can be fed in. I think where you made the example of schools having a significant impact there, I mean, that's, again, one of the reasons why we have a dedicated officer going into schools. So over the past 10, 15 years, we've been one of the best local authorities at delivering and supporting eco schools programs and school travel plans and working with schools on that. So, you know, we've got a dedicated officer at the moment. We used to have one for a long time. We had a little gap for a couple of years where we were unfortunately unable to carry that on, but we did still have specialist consultants going in and working with each of those schools to try and take that responsibility of that area-based approach, and then getting their pupils and their parents and the staff there to look at their own options to make that informed travel choice to try and help really manage that. And that's the same approach we'd look at with businesses as well. We've got an area-based travel plan for the local enterprise zone, again looking at that as a big trip generator and a major employment site in the county. So again, it's not just around the scheme design, but it's about how we get the best out of the network, and it's about that whole, that's what I was referring to earlier, it's about giving those travel choices, because people travel differently for different means, and that's my point really. Some people will do it for health, some people do it for cost, some people do it for convenience, and it's getting the best out of that. So I think it's having all of that informed as part of that strategy as well. So sorry, I don't know if you want to bring in Ed.
Just before I bring Ed in, and if we're going to talk about bypasses, we'll talk about pedestrianisation then. Hereford's pedestrianised in the centre, Ross isn't. And of course that has a big issue in terms of how people actually do travel around. So when I talk about active travel, I'm talking about more than just simply cycleways. I'm talking about reconfiguration of even the town centres themselves. So it's a big issue. And this is why I don't want it just brought into transport. That's why I want us to be able to consider all these other aspects of it that can encourage people to walk around towns and shop. Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the point that I just want to make is that obviously where you're talking earlier about your policies and your plans, I think we've got a very clear structure there. It might not seem particularly clear to you and the committee at the moment, but that's something that you know, Ben has obviously said we could take away as an action and come back with how that sort of all of those policies nest, you know, for want of a word, together. So we provide that clarity. I think, you know, you can have as many policies and plans as you want, and I think, you know, there's obviously a place for that. We all need to know where we're going. You know, I mean, in terms of what we're trying to do, you know, wherever it might be across the county, and for whoever it might be, and for whatever their needs are. But it also comes down to how we deliver that and the funding that's available to us. So that's obviously a big requirement that what we're talking about here, it won't happen overnight. We're talking about some big schemes. In one of the appendices, we talk about some of the smaller interventions that we can make as well. So one of the things though that really is key is about where that funding comes from, and we need to have those plans in place to demonstrate what we're trying to do, to then go and bid for the funding that we would like to see coming into the county. So that was just a point that I wanted to make, really, that that funding is key. We're not going to get it all in one, at the same time, but we do need that to try and deliver some of these things moving forward. Thank you.
Right. But staying with pedestrianisation, because that's just one element of all of this. Where is pedestrianisation being addressed in the county plans at the moment, council plans at the moment?
I suppose I myself can't answer that one, but I think you're probably looking there very much at the core strategy in terms of the overarching place document and strategy for the county. Within the Hereford City, there's the economic master plan, the big economic plan, which again looks at that. But I suppose I probably need planning colleagues to support with that if you're looking at the place shaping, if that makes sense.
But I haven't seen much in the way of a debate on pedestrianisation in the council. I'm just at a loss to know where it would sit. And this is the reason why, when you shoehorn active travel and what we're trying to achieve into particular plans, I think you do lose some of the elements of it that you want to actually promote as well in terms of active travel. Councillor Highfield.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, not everybody can cycle, but just about everybody can walk, and are willing to do so if it's convenient. So I think pedestrianisation is great. It is a surprise that it's not a specific topic. It may not be possible, but at least it should be actively looked at as a specific topic. I agree with that.
So we might want to include that in our recommendations somewhere. Councillor Davis?
Yeah, to add to that, I know future developments, housing developments, bearing in mind the increase in the potential amount of construction we're going to have to do over the next 10 years within the county, that the big developers are looking at active travel as a part of their solution to their housing developments, which is great and really important. However, coming back to what Councillor Highfield said earlier about that rainy January morning where everybody jumps in their cars and drives, we need to ensure that active travel is balanced with still the ability to move people around the county, irrespective of of what's going on at the moment. So I'm really concerned that maybe if we look too much at I don't want to say too much at active travel needs to be relevant, and we need to have the supporting infrastructure to make it work. So the bus services need to improve, all those kind of things need to be better, so that in inclement weather, people have the option of, if they don't want to cycle, they can jump on a bus, and therefore not have to use cars. And that's another relevant consideration, I think. Tom.
Thank you. So you're now... Oh, Councillor Thomas, right.
Yeah, pedestrianisation. Yeah, it's good, but it's the death knell of small independent shops. Now, you should know more than any. We don't have any pedestrianisation in Ross. And all those shops in the Broad Street and Gloucester Road survive because you can go in, park, go to the butcher's shop, pick up your meat, pick up everything else, get back in your car and go. So Hereford is now, we've got a lot of independent shops closed because there's no way you can get the materials. Sorry if you're buying a pair of shoes, but if you're buying anything large, how the hell do you get it back to your car, which is when your car park's half a mile away? It's something you're talking about active, all this sort of thing, and joined up thinking. This is one of the things that is never. And if you look at Chester, there's another massive pedestrianisation. What survives in Chester? There are more cafes and bars and inns in Chester, but there are very, very few active shops, only shops selling what I would call trinkets. So your pedestrianisation needs to be well thought about, because otherwise you will have no independent shops. We're all on about the city centres dying, and this is one of the reasons why they are dying, unfortunately. And to say, in Ross, that's a great success because you get in and out.
Although you try walking around Ross for the car parks. I mean, the car parking is, and the bigger and bigger these, and trying to get through with push chairs or a wheelchair gets more and more difficult. But that is an issue, I agree, that you have to look at the business side of it. But given that we keep our roads in good nick, it helps all the drivers for Amazon and for the other online businesses that are actually one of the reasons why our small businesses are struggling. It's the internet as much as anything else. But I would like to look at pedestrianisation and take that into account in looking at it as well. So I think we've got oh, sorry, Ben. Okay.
I was just going to add, I mean, it's one maybe for us to take away and look at, but I think from previous evidence I've looked at and studies, it's typically suggesting that walkers and cyclists do actually spend more in sort of local times in city centres. So I suppose the evidence I've seen to date is maybe slightly contrary to what that discussion was, but I think that's maybe something to be considered as part of, you know, the whole transport strategy and that place strategy as well. I just wanted to say that because I suppose the evidence I've seen has been contrary to that in the past.
Are you suggesting a recommendation?
No, I suppose I was more just trying to inform the conversation a little bit, that was all really. But I mean, I think, I don't know, Dave, if you've seen anything similar, but in terms of previous strategies, when I was a lot closer to a lot more of these projects, walkers and cyclists typically did spend more per journey and were in those areas more often and typically would spend a much more aggregated value in those small businesses because they're just there more often. And yeah, sorry, I'm not articulating that very well, but I suppose those are the transport studies I've seen in the past.
I guess the big example, Councillor Stark, is the mini Holland schemes in London, which were obviously very controversial when they put in, but the shopkeepers saw their profits go up in all those schemes because people had a longer linger time. I don't know if that's what it's officially called. I think it might be linger because they're walking and they're cycling, so they're staying there longer. So rather than that nipping in and out of one shop, they're going from that shop to that shop. And actually the independence in those areas thrived. And I do understand London is always seen as a kind of pathological compared to everywhere else, but there's the evidence for those ones certainly is strong for cycling and walking, increasing local spend.
We're thinking along the same lines, David, because I was about to bring into the debate what do others do and what's the evidence, because back to Councillor Thomas's point, I know there could be initially an impact, but I agree with you. I think keeping people in the town centre for longer and for a time when they can enjoy it as well, so they want to come to the town centre and they want to be there, not just to shop, but to go for a coffee or to use other services like get a haircut. Why not? And I would have thought that eventually the footfall may not increase, but they may stay there longer, as you say, and therefore purchase more. Sorry, Councillor Peverdy.
I haven't used the service myself, but I understand you can hire a kind of peddy cargo bike. So if you do have large items that you can't carry to your car, you can hire these bikes with big trailers and then sort of cycle to your choose and go park area to get it in your car. So there are lots of ways of dealing with those issues, I think.
I was just going to add that is one of the schemes that we've helped to facilitate, and Richard done that as part of the Beryl scheme. So that's part of the work we've been doing on active travel. So hopefully you do get to experience that in the future.
And it's this point about how do we help our high street. I mean, if we do nothing, Councillor Thomas, it's in decline anyway. We're trying our best, and Ross, to come up with all sorts of recovery plans to encourage people to actually come to the town centre. But there are certain consumers who are not that mobile, or who may have pushchairs, or who may find it difficult to get around parked cars, who would benefit from a different approach, I feel.
I think Councillor Highfield just mentioned one of the other death knells of town centres is out-of-town shopping, and Hereford, thank God, hasn't got a out-of-town centre, but we've got an awful lot of shops that are out of town, which have all got car parks. All the supermarkets have got car parks. Our small shopkeepers are fighting with one hand tied behind their back all the time. We've got to try and sort this out. For example, car parking. Why don't we have free for the first hour so people can get in and shop in the centres and get out again? I know it's a hobby horse of mine, but we have no park and ride in Hereford. And the only excuse I've heard is it's not economic. Well, of course it's not economic to the council, but it'll be economic to a great deal of other people. And don't forget, every park and ride bus, you take at least 5 to 15 cars out of the centre. And it would be very easy to, with your car parking fees, for example, make them much more expensive. The longer you stay in the car park, the much more expensive they are. So people that work in the city will take park and ride because A, it's a lot cheaper, and B, as long as it goes to a bit like the Monica buses, they just travel around the city. So if you're like, just example, Cheltenham, they had the most horrendous problems with cars and parking. So they've gone for park and ride. One of the most successful park and rides in the whole of this part of the country. Well, but it wasn't economic in the beginning, but it became economic. There's so many ways that you're talking about your active travel and joined up thinking. Well, why not have, this a bit of joined up thinking? We have 2 major places, Hereford Market and Rotherham, where you could create decent park and ride car parks. Whereas, it may not be economic to us, the council, but it'll be certainly economic to the ratepayer eventually.
To jump in on that one, I guess the current offering that the council has is the park and choose strategy, I guess. So we do have a number of locations all around the county where it's exactly that, really, but it's looking beyond that in terms of giving you the whole choice. So if you take, for example, the Aylstone Park, just at the other side of the Aylstone Hill, there's free car parking there where you can leave your car potentially to car share in, to walk in or cycle in, and there we've got lockers there so that you could leave your bike there you could use that to use your bike across, or you can use one of the barrel bikes or one of the e-barrel bikes that are located there as well. So that's kind of where we've looked at it across the county. So that's looking at all of the different avenues and corridors into the city, and also not just the city, that's looking county-wide. And we do have a sort of a register of users there that we can communicate as well and take feedback from them. The council probably 10 years ago used to run seasonal park and rides. I don't know if you remember, we used to run the Christmas park and ride, which would come in on the A49 around, I think is where the skate park is now. It used to be the car park for that, and there used to be one from Grafton as well. I guess it's the road capacity to have the dedicated lanes, because as I said, there's a number of drivers as to why you might get in, jump on the bus or walk or cycle, and whilst it might be cheaper, it might not always be where you'd necessarily going to. It might just be that it might take you just as long to get out of the car, get in the park and choose, to then get back in that same traffic to come into the city, I guess. But it's having all of those constraints looked at in terms of that wider strategy. I mean, I can share with the committee if you're helpful, if it would be helpful, all the information on the park and choose. That is all on the website. There is a map there. You can see all of the different sites with all the facilities at each one. And again, we have sought to invest in those through the active travel money we've got through the DFT and other ways.
Well, only to say that it's a good scheme, and it's worked for me, and I think it's far superior to park and ride in that you're not necessarily saying get on another motor vehicle to get in, but cycle, walk, and to give all the options. So that's one that needs commending and doing more of.
Well, yes, I agree, but we're a county with a very aging population and not going to get on Beryl's bikes. And when I drive around the county, the city, there's an awful lot of Beryl's bikes stood, nobody using them, which seems to me to be a shocking waste. So you might have got your park and active, but not park and ride. This is very, very important because we are an aging county. We are going to get far worse because of our planning policy for the last 20 years. We're going to get older and older and older. And I'm sorry, Beryl's bikes, I certainly wouldn't get on a Beryl's bike and go through Hereford. You know, I want to live a few more years.
Then I'll bring in Richard from online.
But Councillor Thomas, I think that's just a misconception. I use Beryl bikes. I know a lot of people that use them. I understand from looking at the figures that it's well used, that it's viable, that use is increasing. You may see bikes sitting there not doing anything. That's so that the service is there when people go there. The worst thing is if you go to a Beryl Bay and there's not a bike there. So there needs to be enough there so that people can use them. And I understand it's a really successful scheme.
Richard?
Thank you, Councillor Stark, and thank you, Councillor Bugby. I think you answered that for me really well, actually. I was just going to say, in the last week alone, we've seen 2,700 journeys using the Beryl bikes across the city. It is a really well-used scheme. They do need to be there on the street and available for people as and when people need them. As you say, it's a shame if you go to a bay and there isn't a bike near you, but what we try and do is have a really good distribution of bays across the city and bikes. We've now got over 300 bikes on the street available for people to use across 70 bays. We've got one of the highest bay densities across any territory that Beryl has across the UK. It's fantastic. So it's a really well used scheme. And one of the things we wanted to do is initially we only had the pedal bikes, we didn't have the e-bikes. And what that does is it increases the accessibility of the scheme for people. So people who are less physically able, who are less confident in using a pedal bike, actually research has shown that they are more confident and happier to use the scheme with an e-bike. So we started with 30 e-bikes, we've now got over 100, and we have seen the diversity in the scheme increase, both across age and gender, which is really fantastic. So it's performing really well. And actually, one of the things that continues to surprise me, something that you touched upon earlier, is yes, we do see seasonal dips in usage of this scheme. It's an active travel scheme, it's cycling. So you do see less leisure trips when the weather's pretty foul, but actually the statistics are amazing. Even when we have really foul weather and really stormy weather, the core user base is still there commuting, using it for their really essential trips. So people are put off a little bit by the weather, but we also mustn't assume that just because it is raining outside that people aren't using their own bicycles or the Beryl scheme or walking. People still do that. It will put off those leisure trips, the non-essential trips, but those essential trips are still going ahead by and large by those original modes.
Thank you, Richard. I'm conscious we are getting towards 12 o'clock and Councillor Price will leave. I just want to finish off by bringing in wheels, mobility scooters, but I'd also like to talk about electric scooters. And they talk about this being part of active travel, Ben, but I find some mobile scooters quite dangerous for pedestrians, particularly when they actually travel along pavements. I don't know, what is our policy on mobile scooters and electric scooters generally?
Might need
Do we have
Dave
one?
and Ed to come in on this one, but I think my understanding of the scooters is they have to be used as part of a registered scheme with the local authority. For example, there was the pilot schemes across the country. So Beryl do have, our partner Beryl do have e-scooters around the country, and they need to be through a local authority scheme as part of the national pilot, because then you've got the insurance and the regulation within that, and they are reviewing that at the moment. And we have lobbied and we have written to the Secretary of State saying we're ready. Our current Beryl contract could be extended to include that, but we're not currently one of those pilot schemes. We've asked to be part of one, and when one dropped out, we asked again. So in terms of the council, we've tried to do that, and then that would be part of a very well managed scheme, if that makes sense. My understanding, and others will come in, is that unless they're part of those schemes, they're not legal. I don't know, Dave, if you want to jump in.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, just to echo what Ben said, the Secretary of State a few years ago set this up as a trial, as a pilot scheme, and you had to apply. And I only know this because I did the one in Gloucestershire. And they changed the law so that those pilot schemes were legal. But everywhere else in the country, e-scooters are not a legal mode of transport on any kind of public highway. So the problem we've got, of course, is how do you police that? So it's very easy to buy an e-scooter off of Amazon or other websites I'm sure are available, and jump on the roads, and actually it's very hard to stop. So I'm not aware at the moment that we have a current policy because we wouldn't be able to have a policy on it because it's illegal to use an e-scooter in Herefordshire. So I don't. Yeah, it'd be hard for us to have a policy on that, I think.
There's that aspect of it, but there's the aspect that road use is becoming very congested. Pavement use is becoming very congested. I mean, I will find sometimes as a pedestrian, I'm facing a cyclist or I'm facing a mobile scooter, and they're travelling much faster than I am. And I really think there's a free-for-all out there, and I just don't know what the answer is, whether within our active travel policy, we have got a grip on all these different modes of transport we call active travel, which to me are actually competing against each other, and whether we know what we should be doing in terms of actually managing the way that the pavement itself is used, because mobile scooters are dangerous if they hit you. I think there have been accidents with them before where pedestrians have been injured. So I'm a bit concerned that we call it part of the active travel set of transport modes, but it does lead to competition, and it does lead to, I think, a greater risk for pedestrians. So I'm just trying to open up the debate as to where we are with it.
I think Richard's looking to come in.
Richard?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Ben. Yeah, just further to the points that Ben and Dave have made, really. E-scooters are only legal on the road. So even if you are part of one of the trial schemes and you have a licensed operator to run it, as colleagues have rightly said, that's the only legal way of using an e-scooter, they still must be used on the roads, and therefore all scheme users have to at least have a provisional driving license to use them as well. So Dave's right, we don't have a council policy on them. It's currently it's UK legislation. As Ben says, we have registered interest in being a trial scheme. At the moment that isn't available to us. The government might have different views on that. But just to make the point, I think, Councillor Stark, they're only legal to use on the roads anyway. So if you do see people using them on pavement, they shouldn't be. And I think you're right. I think we need to be careful about them. They are regulated. They are limited in their top speed. But it is important how they are deployed. And we think we could deploy them successfully in Hereford. They would share the bays with the other bicycles across the barrel scheme if we were to introduce them. But you'd have to make sure that you had a very strong message, comms message out there about their use and their safe use as well. So I think, yeah, it's something to look at, but just around that point of also cannibalizing other options for active modes, I think actually the research is really interesting. And if you do introduce e-scooters along with other modes in the city, so alongside pedal bikes, e-bikes, e-cargo bikes, which were also mentioned as well, actually it's complementary and you get this really interesting effect. It's almost like a halo effect where you might introduce new users to the scheme, and then because they now have the app on their phone, they have an account, etc., then they might start to use the other modes as well. So different demographics of people use different types of micro-mobility vehicles, so pedal bikes, e-bikes, e-scooters. But then when they start to do those things, then they start to use the other types as well. So they might walk more, they might use public transport more as a result, so buses, etc. So it has a really positive cumulative effect rather than a cannibalizing effect.
Okay, but just for clarification, mobile scooters, they should not be on pavements if they're using mobile scooters, is that right?
E-scooters shouldn't be on pavements at all, no.
They should not be on pavements. So perhaps there's
I'm not talking about mobility scooters, I'm talking about
mobile scooters, they should not be on pavements.
So, sorry, just to clarify, are you talking about mobility scooters?
Yeah,
or
mobility scooters.
So, sorry, we're talking about the e-scooters. So
I'm talking about the mobility scooters as well now. I'm talking about them.
Chair, they're asking which one are you talking about, though?
Well, we've talked about e-scooters already, but now I want to talk about mobility scooters.
Yeah, they can go on pavements.
They can?
Yeah.
See, this is a confusion you've got, isn't it?
Well, because it's about their mobility and access. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can I just add that they're completely different, because a mobility scooter is limited to, I think, 5 miles an hour maximum, although some of them have been rigged. Whereas an e-scooter is capable, I think, of 15 miles an hour is the legal limit.
16.
16, is it? Okay. So there's a whole different thing between the two. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to... There is a DFT policy called the hierarchy of road users, which is essentially a triangle with pedestrians at the top, and then everyone else, and then it kind of works its way down in terms of who should give way to who in whatever context that is. So pedestrians kind of rule everywhere they are. I know it doesn't feel like that when you're a pedestrian and you're being charged at by an e-scooter and a mobility scooter and a cyclist and a trike. But that's DFT's position on it, is that's the law supports that pedestrians as being at the top of that tree, as it were. So mobility scooters are one down, if you like. I'm sure the language for that is it needs work, but
I just want to finish off. So, are you saying, David, that there's no real reason for further communications here about the way that users actually use the pavement and use the roads here from the council?
I don't know what else we would have that would be different to national policy
All right. Okay, thanks.
on that.
Councillor Pemberton?
Well, only on that. As I understand, Richard does sort of organises behaviour change programmes in schools, and so they're very much focused on pedestrians and cyclists and how we deal with things. I wonder is there any sense in having a programme for motorists so they understand the hierarchy? You know, we've talked about how it's very hard to implement safe school routes when the behaviour of motorists actually needs changing.
Happy to come in on that one. We had quite an interesting and novel scheme a few years ago funded by the DFT, which we would provide learner drivers with free driving tests if they were to do some cycling workshops with us. And the idea behind that was that actually if you yourself are a cyclist, because often we talk about cyclists and walkers and drivers like they're different people, but I'm sure most of you are the same as well. I do want to be above, I walk, I cycle, I drive a car. I don't fit into any one camp, I do want to be above. And actually that makes me a much more considerate driver because I also cycle, because I also walk. And so that's the training that we were providing. You're saying, okay, well, we'll give you a free driving test, but actually you've got to do some cycle training first. And then we provided it to HGV drivers in Rodimus as well. To be honest with you, it's difficult to get uptake, less so for the learner drivers because a free driving test is a fairly big deal. It's fairly expensive to get on the road nowadays with all the driving tests, let alone insurance, etc., etc. It was more difficult to get into the HGV drivers and training, but we did do this, and it, like I said, it was a novel idea and it was quite a nice idea, and the theory behind it was really sound. It's really hard to quantify the outcomes and the impacts of that. But it was an interesting thing that we were doing when we had DFT funding under the Access Fund.
Okay, I'm going to bring this debate to an end, but I'm still anxious about this lack of understanding about the use to which our pavements or roads are put, because mobility scooters, just to make it clear, I do find them dangerous the way sometimes they are driven along our pavements. I've had to get out of the way quite rapidly when one or two have come along. So this idea that it's in the highway code, and thank you very much, Councillor Price, for your help today. This idea is in the highway code. How do we do more than just simply having a highway code there to educate people, or is there no chance of doing that? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Potentially as a recommendation back for us to look at how we can do that in part of new schemes, or how we fund. Like I said, you know, the scheme that Richard's described around the HGV was one we linked up with public health and road safety, and that innovation around that really helps when we're going.
So an education scheme then.
So I guess maybe, you know, it's something for us to take away and think, you know, how.
Okay.
Because we're always looking for external funding through DFT, through public health, through climate reserves, etc., in developing schemes, and potentially for us, we can take that and go, actually, is this how can we look at a scheme that delivers that and sort of put that in with all the other schemes when we go to bid. So I think it could be a really good suggestion for us to take
So
away.
it's how we bring education into those schemes that we are promoting for active travel.
Well, I think there's potentially two things. One is all road users should already know the highway code.
I know
think
that.
that's that's almost a taken as given. But if they don't, so is there some education to do there? And secondly, as part of our active travel delivery and behaviour change projects, how can we take that challenge and try and come up with some new innovative local schemes that might help with that? I guess is potentially what I'm seeing as a
support
recommendation.
the hierarchy of road use.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to give you a recommendation. I was just trying to take what you said.
Well, I'm thinking of it as a recommendation. But okay, but thanks very much, everyone, for a very interesting debate. What I'm going to ask for now is for us to have an adjournment for 15 minutes. Joelle, can you pause the live stream? Welcome back everyone to the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of the 23rd of September. We are now going to agree our recommendations on active travel, and then we will move on to discuss our work programme for the rest of this year. Can we have the recommendations that have been proposed on the screen, please?
Just give me a couple of minutes.
Right,
Chair,
right,
while I
thank
do
you.
that.
A man in a hurry.
I suppose Daniel's going to claim he actually took a 15-minute break. I mean, what are you doing, Daniel?
They're good recommendations. I mean, they are good. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
There you go, Chair.
Right. Who wants to read them then?
I'll do the honours.
Daniel, you're going to read them then. Fine.
Chair, the committee have drafted the following recommendations. One, that the executive should set out its policy on active travel in one plan and to ensure its alignment with other relevant council plans. Two, an inventory and map of ongoing or proposed active travel projects should be drawn up by the executive and published. Three, a review should be conducted of active travel projects planned, and the executive should come forward with proposals to reduce the overly Hereford focus of current projects and ensure that active travel measures are implemented across the county, including market towns. 4. Active travel needs to reflect the demarcation of cycling, pedestrian, bus, taxiways. All future developments need to actively consider all users of the highways and pathways with appropriate consideration to the ability of movement of the population, not forgetting those with lower levels of mobility. 5. That any business case for new road builds should contain proposals for offsetting the carbon impact of them. And finally, to consider solar farms being incorporated into any planned new road route.
Any comments before we vote on them? Are you happy to vote on them en bloc, committee?
I think Daniel's done a good job this time, summarising that.
Well, he had something to work with, of course.
Oh, you mean you take some credit? Okay.
I'm the politician. No, Daniel's done a good job, he has. I accept that. Are you happy to vote en bloc on them? Council? Yes? Right. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Well done. Thank you very much, Daniel. We will send those over to the executive. And thank you, Daniel and David for Ben and David for your help. Right. We now move on to the work programme. Simon, do we have a current version that we can put up? Because it has changed a bit since we last discussed it. And I will explain why, and then we can have a discussion around it. We also have to pick up Mr. Mackay's point about looking at the highway path destinations at the moment that he suggested earlier in the meeting. Does this incorporate the latest changes, Simon?
Chair, if I might. No, it won't, Chair. We now publish the work programme on a monthly basis. This is September's as published.
Okay.
So this is for, obviously, any changes that you make today will be incorporated into October's work programme.
Right. Explain. Committee, if you will recall, we were going to look at the bus service improvement plan in November. That came about because Connected Communities had an interest in looking at it, but it was agreed that that was more in line with our remit than Connected Communities. Since then, the government have indicated they're going to publish proposals for local authorities being able to set up their own bus services. Not only that, but in talking to the corporate director, Ross Cook, he made it very clear that the grant of 1 million, which we would have been scrutinising, is subject to quite a considerable number of restrictions and conditions set out by the Department for Transport. Now, I'm very keen that we have a fuller debate on bus services across the county, because as you know, I'm concerned about the way that bus services have degraded. I know that Ross's bus services aren't as good as used to be. And to be fair, in the context of active travel, if you don't have a good bus service from Ross, the only alternative for going to Hereford or anywhere is by car. It is actually quite vital. So the proposal is that because we need to wait until we have the wider government proposals on what they mean by local authorities running their own bus services, by the fact that the actual scope of the scrutiny would have been quite narrow, because although it was looking at the £1 million grant for the VSIP, there wasn't a lot of scope for what we could do with that, because the conditions had been set out by the DFT, Department for Transport, as to how it would be used. And for the need, I think, for a much wider debate on bus services and its impact on accessibility across the county, including rural areas as well. The idea now is that would be deferred from November, and that we would look at a much wider topic, Daniel, for our work programme next year. Our committee members are happy with that approach, because it's the first time I've had a chance to discuss it with you. This means that for November, we would promote hedgerow and tree management policy and strategy as our one topic for our November meeting, which I know Councillor Highfield is very keen on.
And I note that there is, I can't remember the date, but there is a political group discussion coming on devolution, which I think is set for a time when we will know more from government. Is that right? Somebody may remember that one coming up. So we'll know a bit more after that anyway.
We'd have this on, sorry. I think you'd agree, Councillor Highfield, that it is worthy of one single scrutiny by us at one meeting, yes? Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, we put road ditches in on that one as well, because there's quite a lot of controversy at the moment with this rainfall about that. So can we not add that? Because let's face it, a hedge and a ditch go together anyway.
So you want to add?
All the road ditches.
The ditches as well?
Because it's it's one goes, when it's a cart and a horse, one goes with the other. So
What do you think? Yes?
Yeah, we had a lot of internal debate in our party on this yesterday on our WhatsApp group, and it was ditches, yes, but I can see the connection with hedges, yeah.
So Simon, can we expand that to hedgerow, tree and road ditches policy, please?
I've got that, Chair.
Oh, you've got it, yeah. And you agree that would be at our November meeting, yes? Okay. So that leads, Ben, sorry.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure you're aware, we've recently commissioned a new Herefordshire tree, hedgerow and woodland strategy piece that's been developed by LUC for Herefordshire. So that's funded by the Climate Reserve Programme, and that's fairly early into, we had the inception meeting a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just trying to think, you're looking at, this is November meeting, isn't it? Yes. So I'm just checking timelines. I think just end of October, we're looking at delivering a stakeholder workshop, and we'll be consulting on some of the early draft work of that. So I guess it's just so you're aware of that, because if a scrutiny you want to review it when it's finished, it's not quite finished yet, but there will be a draft. So potentially it's an opportunity to have an informed discussion there. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that as part of your
Could we make sure that draft is circulated to the members of this committee?
Well, that's
when
what
it's
I'm
ready?
suggesting, yeah. So, so I'm just letting you know that timescales. I will just go back and double check that timescale does work, because that was the draft timescale
18th, 19th.
we've got. Or we need it to work, essentially, don't we? So make sure we can get that to this committee.
Is it a timing issue then, Ben? Are you saying that November's too early for this topic? We better wait, because we could easily look at River Lug and then switch it to January.
It's going to be tight, is what I'm saying, because by the time we should have a draft of that strategy around the same time, it's just then meeting the publication dates for the meeting, if that makes sense, because we need to have it in time. I can
Mr. Chairman, should we not be scrutinising the draft before we scrutinise the final thing? Because the final thing is the final thing, isn't it?
Have we seen that we can go ahead in November with this or not?
Well, if the draft will be ready by then, not the final thing, because then we can scrutinise the draft and make our comments.
That's what I'm suggesting. I just need to double check. It should work on the time
It should
we've
work,
got.
because that would
I'm
give
just
us
flagging that for you.
something to get our teeth into as well at the November meeting then, wouldn't it? It'd be part of the evidence, wouldn't it?
It would be a really good part of the consultation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned a stakeholder event. Is that something that would be useful for us in advance of that scrutiny meeting?
So again, we're quite early stages on this. This is the plan we've got. So I need to just go back and confirm the actual dates for the stakeholder group or the stakeholder workshop. But there will be one, and obviously we can extend invitations to that. I guess if this is part of the scrutiny work plan, what I wanted to just make sure as you're aware is we'll have a draft around that, and it'll be really good time then, because it'll be a good opportunity to feed that in before it becomes a final document. So rather than scrutinising a final document, you've got a better opportunity of inputting. So I think it could work really well, is what I'm saying.
And if the stakeholder event is going to help our understanding of the draft policy, then that would be useful.
Yeah, so I'll just need to confirm when that date of that is, and then when I'd have the notes from that to then inform the committee, if that makes sense. Because I suppose, are you saying you'd want to know what was discussed at the stakeholder to then be able to apply that and helpfully? Well, essentially it's either one or two, isn't it? So we're going to have that anyway. This would then be a second good opportunity to help shape that. If I've got the notes from the stakeholder workshop that I can share, then obviously we would do that as well.
Can we not be part of the stakeholder workshop?
Potentially, but then you'd be doing it twice potentially.
Well, while we're on this, we've still got Mr. Mackay's suggestion that we should be looking at the upkeep of highway and path records. It's difficult to slot that into our work programme, because I haven't got really an ideal topic that would hang from, because we're doing the River Lug in January, and then we're doing energy efficiency in March.
Say something, Chair.
Would that be?
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah, jump in. Yes, certainly.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, this doesn't. My advice would be that this doesn't really constitute a topic that's appropriate for scrutiny. This concerns a very limited, very local matter, an operational matter, and it's my opinion, or it's my advice to you, that this is best dealt with through a service request through customer services, and if the resident is unhappy with that, then to take it through the complaints process and then the ombudsman. If it's a request for information, that should go through to freedom of information request, and if it concerns a particular planning matter, then it should go through the planning officer and then through the courts. This does not strike me as a topic that the committee can really add value to or any use of, so I would advise that you don't pursue it.
What does the committee think? Are you willing to take that advice? Yes.
Yeah, I generally agree with Daniel. I mean, the question was actually a bit of what is actually a much bigger picture that one day we might get into. But that specific point that he was making, I don't think that's something we can address.
But I'm anxious that there should still be a response to Mr. Mackay in terms of picking up the issue, so he does have at least some sort of resolution of it. If it's not going to be scrutiny, Daniel, how would we do this?
It should go through customer services helpline.
Will we do it? Will we pick it up?
Well, we can certainly redirect this question.
Okay. So the agreement is we will redirect Mr. Mackay's question as it's just too specific for our work programme. It doesn't mean it's not a relevant and actual worthwhile question to ask, Mr. Mackay, if you're looking in. But it's just that it's not one that fits with our scrutiny work programme currently. Thank you. That leads me to January and the river lug. So in January, we'll be looking at river lug pollution. And there's still an ongoing issue there about whether we've got our responses to that river lug moratorium right. The house builders who have suffered the most from the moratorium will say that they contribute the least to the actual problem itself, that the problem is an agricultural one. So even though it's worthwhile having developed wetlands, and I don't want to debate today, but just give you a feel for what we might be discussing in January, the wetlands themselves are not addressing the problem, which they're not stopping the river lug being polluted, they're not stopping the problems that the Environment Agency and Natural England have identified. So I still think it's a topic that's worthwhile. I think it's a topic that's timely. I think it's one that is worth giving priority to. As long as you agree with it, I would leave that as a single topic for January. Are the committee happy with that as well?
I definitely support that. I think it's a subject we have to get into. Whether we'll be able to solve anything, that's another story, but we really need to get into it, make sure the right questions are asked.
Good. And that leaves March, which is energy efficiency, which is unchanged and which we've already agreed.
It's okay when you finish, Chair.
Pardon?
When you finish, there's something else I want to add. Just to let you know as well, you should have had invitations into your diaries for scrutiny committee meetings in May, July and September, so they should be with you now, and we'll be in touch very soon to arrange lines of inquiry meetings as well, just to get them all into your diaries.
On that point, we've been discussing in the round a longer list of topics, and there are a number there that we do want to discuss, one of which came up today, which is a greater in-depth study of speed limits. I don't want to just concentrate on 20, I want to look at all speed limits and how it fits with road safety generally, which is a real concern of mine. Because as a pedestrian, it doesn't matter if something's 20 or 30, if somebody's doing 60.
That's the other issue that comes with it. It's if you have a speed limit, is it going to be enforced? And the reality is that in many places, no, it's not going to be enforced, and so there's no point. There's no point having a law if you can't enforce it. And I don't know if anybody knows Erdsley. You've got a very big main road going through there. Actually, certainly they probably need a 20 by the school, but in the centre of the village, you don't need a speed limit because traffic calming is automatic with all the cars parked along there. The road is narrow, and so you've got automatic traffic calming. People just simply do not speed through the centre of the village, regardless of what the speed limit is. So traffic calming can be a very much more effective, because the thing about traffic calming is you get it right. It doesn't need enforcement. Like they did in Pembridge, the 20-mile-an-hour limit was not what achieved anything. It was the getting rid of the centre line and putting white lines along the side. They are proven to work in tight village streets, and they are self-enforcing. You don't need policemen there with a laser gun. So when we look at these speeds, we really need to look at road safety, which might include speed limits, but it might be there are other methods, signage, splays, visibility. And as an aside, I discovered, Richard would be interested in this, through planning, that it is perfectly legal for a landowner to build an obstruction on their land that makes a previously safe road junction into an unsafe one. And there is absolutely nothing we can do about it because you can't rely on private land for splays. Now that's the sort of thing which is idiotic, but it's the rules of the game when it comes to planning. So when we talk about road safety in villages, we've got people doing that. We've got people building sheds on the corners of junctions and obstructing the view. And they're legally entitled to do that. So it's all part of the picture, not just speed limits.
Sorry, Councillor Pibb.
Well, I only just wanted to make a quick point that I disagree with your point about not bothering to have a law just because it's not enforceable. I just think you put in a law to gradually change behaviours, you know, like they did when they brought in seatbelts. It does change over time.
They enforce seatbelts. There were lots of people getting prosecuted for not having seatbelts.
Can I, sorry, I'm just going to intervene here. This is not on the agenda. You cannot discuss this. So please, back to the topic.
Right. In a way, Daniel's right, but he's not right as well, because what I was trying to get at was whether this is the topic we want to discuss in May.
What speed limits?
And road user safety.
In May.
In May. So yes, you're right up to a point, Daniel, but I'm trying to get a feel for whether this is of enough priority for us to put it in for our May slot, which would help officers as well, wouldn't it, and the clerk to have that. Is that what you want to do, committee? Have it in our May?
I bowed to that. I digressed before, so Daniel is right. I'm sorry, Daniel. But I like the idea of discussing the subject of road safety.
With speed limits in May.
Yeah.
Can we have that for the May meeting then, please?
Will do, Chair.
Right, thank you. But you're quite right. You should keep us on the straight and narrow. That leaves the rest of the year, and I think we have got a long list, haven't we, Clark, of topics. Is it possible to put it up on the screen? If not, I just want to have a look at that now, just to see, not to debate them, please, as Daniel has said, but just to You've upset Councillor Highfield.
He hasn't upset.
It takes a lot more to upset Councillor Highfield.
Pardon?
It takes a lot more to upset Councillor Highfield than some targeted advice.
Or if you can read them out, Simon, that'd be fine.
I might suggest, Chair, perhaps an informal review of your work programme.
Well, we might do that.
It's been a while.
It has been. It might do that as well. But we've got time now, given that we've got our programme to May now. Well, one thing we wanted to discuss was farming. I know that was one of the topics that the late Councillor Jinmin wanted us to discuss. And that does really go across so much of the issues that we've been talking about in the past. So it comes into land use, food security, flooding, pollution, everything else. So farming is one of the areas I would like to actually have as part of our work programme next year. But I don't think we can do it in one bite. I think I'm looking to Councillor Thomas here and others, but if you could give some thought as to how you might cut up a farming topic into, say, 2 or 3 scrutinies, then that could very well cover the rest of the work programme for next year.
I think you could get farming into one, but you've got the environment, which is very much cap in hand. So I suspect you're going to have it over 2 meetings to be
2 meetings.
To be effective. Yeah.
And how would you split it? Land use, land management, or?
Yeah. Yes. If we, again, it's a bit like a triangle, and if we start at the top and sort of spread it out. So the first one would be the basic farming techniques that affect ratepayers, and then move on with the farming and the environment as a second one.
So if you want to suggest that in an email to Simon, could you? Thanks. Be very grateful. So that's, sorry, Daniel.
So, Chair, might suggest, I think there's a lot of topics that have been suggested at this meeting, and I would suggest at the moment that they're quite loosely formed. It's been a good 8-9 months since you've met to talk about your work programme in the committee, and it's very much on my long list anyways to arrange meetings for all the committees to talk about their work programmes now that we've put further dates in your diaries. Most of the money run till March, and that's closer than you probably realise. So might I suggest that the committee meet informally on Teams or whatever, and have a sort of a knockabout of its work programme and how it wants to shape the topics that are in there.
Agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel just wants to finish the meeting early.
That too, Chair.
If you're happy with that, then I'm not sure there's much more to be gained from having this discussion at the moment then. But I would still appreciate, Councillor Thomas, if you could put a couple of ideas for the farming side of it for 2 different scrutiny meetings, even if we don't agree when it would happen today. Thank you. That just leaves us to go on to the date of the next meeting then, which is on the 18th of November. And following that, I declare